So he was someone who could have been a starter, but like other people I've worked with, Robert Parrish and Jason Terry, allowed themselves to take on a lesser role. And in Coop's case, he was a sixth man. So he came off the bench, and he was a three-point shooter, he was a dunker, and he guarded the best player. Larry Bird famously said the person who guarded him best throughout his career was Michael Cooper. And he was 6'7", really wiry, strong, thin guy, famously in his life. But he was quick, and he was reliable, and he was relentless, and he knew the places where he would fit in on the court to add value to winning, which is its own skill. And I think the NBA is trying to recognize that maybe a little bit more with getting Coop into the Hall of Fame, and maybe others, Robert Horry and folks like that. But he knew where to fit in, and he was good at it.
A writer and author making his return to Hoopsology Podcast. We welcome Jake Uitti back to Hoopsology. Jake, how are you doing?
I'm well. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great to have you back. And just looking at your catalog, I always enjoy what you select to write about. Just you have a very awesome taste in where you go with the books that you write. And so I'll just plug it right away because I'm excited to get into it. The latest is Coop, the making of a Showtime's Lakers Legend, this lovely book right here.
Yes.
And this hits home a little bit for Alan and I, even though he was a little bit before my time at UNM, but I am a UNM alum, as Michael Cooper is.
Wow.
So this is very cool to be having this discussion about him and learn a little bit more, because honestly, my knowledge is pretty limited when it came to Michael Cooper when I was digging into this a little bit more. But first, I just want to ask kind of the background for selecting this book and working with Michael Cooper on it. How did this all come to be?
Thank you. Yeah, man, it's great to talk to you about it, and I'm glad we're going to dig into the New Mexico stuff. I'm drawn to interesting stories or whatever, but when you think about the 90s, you think about the 80s rather, you think about Celtics Lakers, and the obvious players come to mind: Bird, Magic, Kareem, Worthy, people like that. But there's always other folks involved, and Michael Cooper is a perfect example of that. And when I was thinking of, I'm always trying to find the next project. Even if I'm working on something, I love writing books, love working with players on their memoirs. But you realize when you dig into it that he won 5 championships in the 80s, and Magic and Kareem were the only 2 people to do that. Not even Pat Riley, because he wasn't the head coach for one of those rings. So it's just really interesting, And so how does someone have that type of success, but not that type of, Magic Johnson star power? So that's what makes sort of an interesting story to me, is uncovering the stuff that doesn't, always come with top of mind, the stuff that's not always talked about as much as Magic Johnson or Larry Bird is. And so, I've been drawn to stories like that. Muggsy Bogues, 5'3", the only person to be 5'3" in the NBA. Earl Cureton, who sort of scratched and clawed to stay in the NBA. So, Matt, I appreciate you saying that you like the sort of selection of the folks that I've worked with, because I try to be unique with that.
Yeah, it's great, and the NBA is just full of rich stories. The 80s, of course, is a prime example, that decade, with more and more that seems to be uncovered as we go through and do the digging and research on it as you've done. Just kind of the origin of this story, was Coop looking to kind of get this book out? How did that come about? I'm sure there was interest there, but how did you kind of link that together?
Yeah, so it's hard to come out of nowhere to a famous person and say, I'd like to work with you. There's for very good reasons, there's trust walls up and all that stuff. So what often has to happen on my end is someone kind of has to recommend me, and certainly in the earlier sort of years that I was doing this. So Michael Ray Richardson, who just passed away, rest in peace, I did a book with him, and when I was finishing, we talked to Coop for the book, because there's an Italy connection, and they also played against each other in the 80s in the NBA. And I sort of asked Coop if he was interested in doing a book, given his history, given his championship experience. And he wasn't sure, but he didn't say no. And it was amazing timing. We continued to talk about the idea. He asked me some questions, and eventually we said yes. And it was amazing timing because as we were writing the book, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so it was just like, you can't really plan for that. At least I couldn't plan for that sort of thing. But it was really fortunate, and it was a nice capper on why the book should be out now. It's like, oh well, he's in the Hall of Fame now. As a champion basketball player, but also as a champion WNBA coach and coach of the year and stuff. So. Speaking of rich stories, Coop's got a rich story. He's touched a lot of places in the NBA. So, but it was just a recommendation by Sugar, and then me and Coop sort of talking about the idea and going over some options, and then sometimes it doesn't work out, but that one did.
That's really interesting because I've always wondered how that process.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who are younger, when they think of the '80s, like you were saying, they think of Magic, Kareem. James Worthy on those Lakers teams.
Mm-hmm.
So Coop was like the guy that you did not want to play against, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was like, he took on the toughest defensive assignments. He was fierce.
Mm-hmm.
For viewers who never got to see him play or don't know anything about him, can you just give us kind of a nutshell of like what made Coop Coop?
Yeah, good question. So he was someone who could have been a starter, but like other people I've worked with, Robert Parrish and Jason Terry, allowed themselves to take on a lesser role. And in Coop's case, he was a sixth man. So he came off the bench. And he was a three-point shooter. He was a dunker, and he guarded the best player. Larry Bird famously said the person who guarded him best throughout his career was Michael Cooper. And he was 6'7", really wiry, strong, thin guy, famously in his life. But he was quick, and he was reliable, and he was relentless, and he knew the places where he would fit in on the court to add value to winning, which is its own skill. And I think the NBA is trying to recognize that maybe a little bit more with getting Coop into the Hall of Fame, and maybe others, Robert Horry and folks like that. But he knew where to fit in, and he was good at it. So Magic Johnson needed a co-star on those alley-oops, and needed an outlet for threes, and needed a guy to guard the best point guard or best, player like Larry Bird. And Coop was that amazing, perfect sort of sidekick person.
That kind of leads me, just kind of piggybacking off of Alan's question there. Alan, you mentioned, qualities of being a fierce defender. Jake, you brought up great points of being willing to come off the bench and kind of sacrifice for the team. What would you say, Jake, based on the experience with this book and getting to know Coop better, what are his defining characteristics as, of course, the main character of this book?
Yeah, that's such a good question too. Like, I think the thing that I think of first when I think of Michael Cooper is his personality. He's very affable. He's always down to joke. I don't know if you've listened to his podcast ever, but he's always laughing. He's always joking. He's always ready to talk trash about the Celtics, which is really funny because it's sort of this nonstop rivalry and antagonism and, big brother, little brother. I'm sure he would say the Lakers are the big brother. But so his personality and getting to know him and becoming sort of friends with him along the way, that's been the best part, and it usually is. And then on the court, he was just, he's not the type of person, I don't want to say like he saw red, but he saw that type of focus. And he was not the type of person to ever let up, to ever miss a game if he didn't have to take a minute off. He allowed himself to be a sixth man for the betterment of the team, but it wasn't to take less of a role. And he just relentless, just exactly where you want him at all times and making the right play. Perfect role player, Hall of Famer, that type of person.
Yeah, it's such a stark contrast to the charisma and I guess more so the joking and hilarious nature that he has when you think of what became kind of his bread and butter as a basketball player with the intense defense. I mean, that is just such an interesting juxtaposition there.
Yeah, I mean, just the personalities, it's like Kevin McHale versus Michael Cooper, like just so different in a lot of ways. At least how they present, and I think the Showtime versus the quote unquote blue collar Boston Celtics stuff played into this sort of personality and persona of the folks. Kevin McHale is a really affable, funny guy too. But these myths are created, and the players and sort of play into them a little bit on their own for the sake of the grandioseness of it all. And those rivalries certainly were, and we're still talking about it. It's still fascinating, those back and forths with Boston and LA, and yeah, Coop was in the middle of it for all the years. Worthy, God bless him, wasn't in it all the years. He was drafted later in the decade. Byron Scott came in after the second championship, but Coop was there the whole time.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talked about stories and mythology, and that Showtime Lakers era. I mean, it is such a mythological creation, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a Netflix series about it. There's,
The HBO, everything.
HBO. Sorry, HBO series. There's
a Magic. I think there's a Magic Johnson Netflix. Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. Everybody wants to know more and more about it because it was just a crazy, crazy time. From your discussions and talking with Coop, like what was his take on that era from being on the inside of it? The flashiness, the Showtime. Was it all mythology, or was there some flashiness to the kind of the lifestyle?
Yeah, the line that he always repeated was something that Dr. Buss told him, and it was, "We're here to entertain the entertainers." So that's a two-pronged thing. You got to win, which means in basketball terms, you got to rebound, score, play defense, and then you got to be flashy. Because it's LA, it's glitzy, it's Showtime, and then because if the home crowd is happy after a few no-look Magic Johnson passes to whomever, including Michael Cooper, they get the win, and then you go to the Forum Club afterwards because there's like a dance and nightlife club back then too. So victory and showing off in the most creative of ways, that's what it was all about. So it's sort of a work hard, play hard type of thing.
I'm curious, just based on other research you've done, content that's out there, we have commentary from Bird and Magic and some of those superstar characters. Is there kind of a uniqueness coming from like Coop's perspective, like a role player during that time, and his perspective in telling that story and what he saw during that decade of Showtime Lakers?
Yeah, I think, having a step removed from Bird and Magic and Kareem is an interesting perspective. You're sort of feeling their gravity. You're feeling their impact. Coop was one of the very first people that Magic Johnson pulled aside and told about the HIV diagnosis. Magic Johnson wasn't a defender, so you're not having Larry Bird talk about the difficulty, playing against him from an offensive defensive perspective. So there was a level removed that Coop had, which I think is interesting because it gives a little perspective. You're seeing a little bit of the forest and the trees in that way. But Coop's story is not just the Showtime Lakers. It goes into the WNBA's, first years and the Sparks, who could never get over the hump. And it took him coming in, getting Coach of the Year his first season, and then his next two, they won championships with Lisa Leslie and crew. So, his story extends even, the winning extends even beyond. And he coached in the G League and did well, and played in Italy and stuff too. So, and now he's in the Big Three, just won a championship in the Big Three. So there's a lot of him and Phil Jackson. There's a lot of championships.
And do you think that comes from a place of just wanting to continue to be a competitor, or what do you think has driven him to continue in coaching?
Yeah, I think winning is seductive, and if you know how to achieve it, you're going to go out there and do it. And he obviously knows how to win. And even in this stage of his life, a little bit later, after everything, like, he still knows how to win. He can still coach winners at the Big Three. And so why give it up? Why let that talent go to waste? Just win, baby.
It's funny you talk about his two championships as a coach, and it kind of struck me that I guess the first 6 WNBA championships, both were won by someone named Cooper, right?
Right. That's funny. Yeah.
So,
had a stranglehold on the league. Yeah. Between Cynthia and Michael.
Coopers had it going.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I'm a little bit of a writing nerd. I want to talk a little bit about process. So, you've got a famous person that you're working with, telling their story, helping them find the words, helping them find the right things to say. what kind of goes into that process? It sounds like there's a lot of trust involved, right?
Yeah, that's an important word. And with these books, Michael Cooper, for example, has final say on what goes into it. It's his story. The responsibility that I put on myself is to tell as comprehensive and accurate a story as possible. But at the end of the day, Michael has final say, and so if we don't want something, then it doesn't stay in. Not that there was much of that along the way, but that caveat or that rule or whatever builds some trust because he or whomever I'm working with has the final say. And then after that, it's just a regular process. We talk on the phone weekly, sometimes a little bit more here and there. And we would text each other, and you just build it along the way, and then you send chapters to them, and then Michael approves him, or the people that are working with him approves them, and then it's just kind of a process. And you trust each other, you trust, and I have faith that he's going to pick up the phone, that he's going to have good stories, that he's going to continue until the completion of the book. But yeah, there is a little bit of we're going into the blank abyss together. Let's see what happens.
Have to ask, as a massive Lobo fan myself, and Alan and Justin are as well.
Mm-hmm.
What was Cooper's take on New Mexico, or just any thoughts that he had? Obviously, he didn't spend his entire college career there, but that was the school he was at before being drafted.
Yeah.
What was his reflection on New Mexico, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, New Mexico was like the all-important stepping stone, and not to pigeonhole the university as some sort of stepping stone, but for Coop, he didn't do well at local community college. He failed out and had to sort of get his life back together, and then he started doing well once he understood the value of hard work. And then he was able to transfer to New Mexico, and that's a Division I school. It's not North Carolina or Kentucky, but it's a Division I school and an important school, and success there, which he had, led him to be drafted into the NBA. If you don't have that chance to shine, and you're left without, and so New Mexico is an important school and an important moment in Coop's life. Where would the Lakers be without University of New Mexico? It's a good D1 program that he did well at, and thank God.
It's funny because he came back to Albuquerque in the mid 2000s and brought Albuquerque a D-League championship, which
right, exactly, yeah.
Don't really get a lot of championships out this way.
Why not add another one? I think he's rivaling Bill Russell with that picture with all the rings on his hands. Like why not win another one, Coop? Yeah.
Is to kind of think about a little more of the process too.
Mm-hmm.
As you're kind of going through that and having these discussions, what's like the key to handling any kind of conflict that comes up? I know you were saying he has the final say, but is there any pushback, any kind of pull? Is there discussion about it? Or, is it, what's that like?
Yeah. You try not to get into any of those areas. That's part of the trust stuff is, the Showtime Lakers have a lot of stories, right? There's a lot of stuff that happened. And so it's my job to maybe bring that up, or it's my job to, push a little bit, but it's not my life, and it's not my story, and it's not my book. And so I can ask some questions, and you leave it up to whatever the person wants to say, just like this, right? If you wanted to ask me something about whatever, and you could sense that I didn't want to go somewhere, you guys aren't going to be jerks and, that would be no point. That's not a healthy relationship. And then you can maybe a month later, if we were to do another call, you could revisit something, and maybe I'm in a different mood, or Coop's, so there's ways to try to handle it like a friend would handle it. But it's my job to at least bring it up, or to see, what might fit. And I didn't want Coop to be put in any terrible position either. That's not my goal either. I like, the relationship that we can create, try to get, a comprehensive, accurate book, but not one that is going to, make anyone's life horrible. Why would we want to do that? So, you try not to get to any conflicts, and when you do, try to resolve them like a good relationship. And if something really sticks, then maybe you ask an editor for advice, or someone else in Coop's life, or something like that. But they don't arise often, so it's not a huge deal.
No, I appreciate that perspective, and it makes sense. I think you don't want to, there's a difference between like helping somebody to get their story out and tell the world about who they are and their greatness, their story, versus kind of the gotcha moments. So I do appreciate that it's not it's not fully gotcha moments.
Yeah, like I did that book with Michael Ray Richardson, and when he was banned for drugs in the 80s, and when he was banned for drugs in the 80s, a publisher offered him $1 million to write a memoir, with the caveat being that he would name names of people that he used drugs with in the NBA, and he didn't want to do that, And so when we wrote a book together decades later, it came out 2 years ago or so, or maybe last year. I didn't press him for those kinds of names because, he is. We're not trying to do that, And so if someone was listed publicly or had been arrested or something like that, maybe we'll mention that in the book. But that's not the aim, That's not my role or my job, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's his story, right? It's about him, and not a tabloid. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's always,
and you don't want to lie and don't want to not cover ground, but there's no reason to be egregious or, that's at least how, people will differ. And that's the difference between if I'm writing a book with Michael Cooper or writing a book about Michael Cooper, there's a difference there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's especially, in the modern age, but I even think back to like the 2000s, Phil Jackson had a book that came out. And the only thing I remember about it at all was that there was controversy around Kobe Bryant and difficulty working with Kobe at the time. It was right after they had lost to the Pistons, and there were a lot of sore feelings right after that.
Right.
I just remember not hearing anything else about the book, so it almost maybe detracted from the actual main story of the book. Which,
or maybe it was only written for that. Maybe it was written for that one reason, like if Phil Jackson calls out Kobe Bryant months after they lose a championship, like that's going to make headlines and sell copies. And so, and as an author or as a publisher or as a subject, you try to walk whatever line for whatever aim you want. Phil Jackson probably wanted to sell books and be an X-time, bestseller, and that was maybe a route that he went to go do that. But that's also him writing about Kobe. That's not him writing a book with Kobe. It'd be different. And people may place value judgments on one over the other, and so be it.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask about that, what you had brought up earlier in terms of Cooper kind of taking jabs at the Celtics. And I know it goes both ways with both of those teams and past members of those teams. And it seems to me like there was some legitimate hatred in the 80s, and there was a lot of, the mainstream was kind of adding fuel to the fire, certainly, and media at the time. But it almost seems like it has evolved, like friends, like some of my friends, will insult each other, but there's a love to it and a respect to it. And a jokingness with it. Do you think that's kind of how that has evolved with those two teams for the most part? And maybe what examples do you have from, discussing with Michael Cooper?
One thing he said, and this is the difference between it being out in the world versus it being said by him. And he was like, God put Magic and Larry, where they were at that time, to save basketball or whatever, like, you can't have one without the other. It's like you couldn't have Magic on Boston. You couldn't have Larry, in LA. They're rookies the same year, even though Bird's drafted earlier. They battled in the college in 1979 NCAA final, which is still the most watched final ever. So that's what he'll talk about. And so in that way, one needs the other. It's like Batman and the Joker, which is which. They probably share cowls at whatever time. But you need the one without the other. And then Coop and say Robert Parrish know that at this time. So they'll play on that, and it still, gets an audience and all that thing. So whether they feel it in their bones, you probably don't get rid of that ever completely.
Sure.
But at this point, it's definitely like brothers, I would say, for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's almost like a gratitude in that, in
Absolutely.
saying that, God put Bird and Magic together. And that's another, interesting thing about Michael Cooper. Seems like came from a family of deep faith and certainly has faith himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be there, to have the front row seat of those two rivalry, they played in every finals in the 80s basically. And to believe that is a really profound and cool thing. And to be in the middle of that storm or the tornado or whatever, like, God, the millions of people watching, people, their lives, rooted on that rivalry, people leaving, taking out of work just because they were drunk watching the game the night before. Like, there's so much culture, involved in that. And it's still very much, lingers isn't the right word, but still remains. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I don't think people understand this. I grew up, I was, teenager and youngster in the 80s. And I don't think people understand, like, from 80 to 89, it was Lakers Celtics. There were three other teams that made the finals: 76ers, the Rockets, and the Pistons. And two of those teams, Pistons and 76ers, won a championship, but just won in that year, So in the 80s, I know the Pistons won again later on, but
90, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really it's just interesting because you don't see that, particularly now in the age of NBA parity. The closest we probably got was maybe Golden State, Cleveland. But that was only
right.
That was for half that time. That this was 10 years of Lakers Celtics rivalry.
Yeah, it was one of them was in the finals for all that entire decade. It was, strangely and interestingly, there wasn't any repeat champion until 87, 88. The Lakers, they sort of squeaked by. And they got it. And before that, I don't think there'd been a repeat champion since the 60s Celtics. And so that was kind of a monkey around everybody's back. So in some way there was parity, but another way it was just the same two sort of trading it back and forth, And so along with a little bit of the 76ers and, like you said, Houston, the Pistons. But yeah, just if you liked basketball, and then obviously there's so much more woven in, from race to location to, aesthetic and style and things like that. And so just maybe probably the best rivalry in sports history, definitely up there.
Jake, wondering also, there are parts in the book where Coop talks about basketball being like a healing force in the world, and in certain areas where he played, and that was there were deep experiences there for him. Wondering if you can let us know a little bit of his thought of the game of basketball at large, whether like at the time while he was playing, and also the modern game, if you learned some insights he had on that.
On the value of the game?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, geez, where would Michael Cooper and where would 5,000 other people be if there wasn't the NBA and all the coaches and everybody else who's involved, self included? I feel a lot of gratitude to the NBA, which is why I like writing these books and doing them and working on them with other players, and sort of giving the gift of a book to somebody, and they're giving the gift of their presence and their story to me. But yeah, basketball was the thing that sort of saved Coop growing up. It was something that he could go to and play all the time, and it gave him a purpose. It gave him a sense of identity. Like so many people going to high school, you're a basketball player, like that's who you are, and you may not have a sense of identity otherwise. And then it opened up his world to magic, literally and figuratively, and has given him, an amazing life today. He still works for the Lakers and as a team ambassador, and he still spends a ton of time with the Showtime guys. So yeah, I mean, it's almost like it's like imagining a fish without water, imagining Coop without the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how that influence. You talked a little bit about yourself and how you're grateful for it. Jake, you want to give us kind of an idea of how you became involved in writing, and became a writer and writing about basketball and sports?
Yeah, sort of circuitous. Yeah, I enjoyed writing in college, and I was pretty good at it. And then I very much lucked into a job at a local newspaper writing about sports, first covering the local basketball league, which had a modicum of prestige. And I'm from Princeton, New Jersey, and so there were some Princeton University players in there, and maybe a fringe NBA guy here and there. But that got me my start. And then I moved out to Seattle in, I think, 2007, and I wanted to be a writer, a journalist, and I didn't have any luck at it. And so and this is what I tell people when they ask how they can be involved, I invented my own thing, or at least along with some friends, we made our own sort of literary and arts writing website, and that dovetailed into some certain things, and it also showed the local world here that I, could handle deadlines and write decently and stuff. And so I eventually got some smaller gigs, and then one thing leads to another. And if you're interested, if you're hungry, you try to leverage one thing into the next as best you can, and hope it works out. Hope fate's in your corner. And I've been lucky to have some really great things happen along the way, and including writing books. And I owe a lot to Muggsy Bogues for saying yes to the first book that we did together, and that sort of led to Earl Curitan, which led to Sugar Ray, which led to Coop, which has led to other projects.
That's awesome. Have you experienced from that time you started and really felt that interest in writing, do you feel like writing has evolved? I mean, maybe with the importance of social media now as a medium, do you feel like writing has changed, or maybe your style in certain ways has changed to fit the different mediums that are out there? Or just kind of how do you see the writing landscape as it is right now in 2020?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you can make a living. You certainly can. There's thousands of people, if not, more, doing that right now today, making a living as a writer in some capacity, whether it's, ghostwriting books, whether it's co-writing books, whether it's as a journalist or, content creator or whatever. Obviously, before social media, internet, even a lot of TV, movies and stuff, people relied on books more. They didn't have TVs in their bedroom. They read before they went to sleep. So I'm sure readership is down since 19, whatever. And podcasts are more important. Video stuff is more important. But I am a writer, and I like writing, and I believe that there's always going to be a place for good writing. And I think it's an essential human act to read and to write, and so I sort of hang my hat on that truth, that hope, that truth. So I don't love writing Facebook posts or tweets or anything like that. I'm not on Instagram. I try to get in where I fit in with these books, which are longer form, which takes some patience, some insight, some nuance. And that's what I really like doing. And then I also write about the NBA for The Guardian, and I get to interview people for articles about like the history of the 3-pointer, or, stuff about Seattle Supersonics or things like that. So you gotta evolve, and you gotta do your best. But there is an opportunity out there. And I moved out to Seattle, not to ramble too much, but I was living on the East Coast in New Jersey, and I just didn't seem like there was an opportunity to work for, Vanity Fair or whatever. Just seemed like you had to know some people that I would never know. And so I moved out to Seattle, and Seattle's a great city to start stuff. And so I started, like I said, that literary arts magazine, and that sort of has led to stuff after that.
It's awesome. Is there any, of course. I agree. I think there's almost nothing like a good book, and it's so important to read, just as a society in general.
It really is. Yeah, it really is.
That's never going to change.
Yeah.
Even if readership is down, I think we gotta turn that around somehow for the good of everyone.
Yeah. And it's a little bit, I'm not like smart in the way of planning this stuff, but it's a little bit of a zag, because everybody is,
true,
online in some form, or moving very, very fast. And I'm hoping that these books become more and more in favor, just not even mine, but just in general, and people start to take a little bit more time. And just as people take an hour to listen to a podcast, take an hour to read a book, it is very valuable, even though it seems like a bigger lift in the beginning. It's
100%.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned, you had some innovation there with the group that you started. Is there any advice you'd offer to young writers out there, people looking to write?
Just start your own thing. If I was the editor of the Seattle Times or the Guardian, it's obviously scary to hire a new writer, someone who's unproven or has one or two things out there. So my advice is to show people that you can do it, and get 10, 20, 100 bylines. Work for free. I know nobody wants to hear that, but you work for free in the beginning. Do it. Say yes to every opportunity you can. There's you see these videos on Facebook when you're scrolling, and there's, I come across these Ethan Hawke videos, and he's talking about acting. And he's saying, if you don't want to be a high school acting teacher in Nebraska, then what are you in this for? You either want to be involved in acting or you don't. So you either want to write or you don't. If you're doing it to chase an award, to chase a paycheck, that's a different story. And, but if you want to write, work for free, if that's the only you can get, and even if you're getting paid well in some areas, you might have to work for free in other areas too. So it's do the work, and I think everything else will come eventually. It's probably the quick way to say that.
Yeah, I love to hear that. My daughter wants, but actually both of my kids want to be writers. So
Yeah.
and
What do they want to do? Like,
my daughter's really, she's involved. She really likes plays, and because she's an actor also, so she likes that stuff, and like more like fantasy and crime kind of things. So
Cool.
she's yeah, and we're all like,
you just got to do it,
Yeah.
You just have to do the thing. It's like I play guitar pretty well, and I've had people like, you got to give me lessons. And it's like, you have to sit with the instrument and play it with your fingers for an hour every freaking day. Not because you begrudgingly do it, but because you like it, So your daughter, Alan, like, obviously, I'm sure she knows this, but it's like, write stuff, even if it never sees the light of day, act in whatever you can act in for free or for pay, for as long as you're getting these jobs, because something will happen, a window that you least expect will open up. Someone will say yes, some opportunity that someone canceled at the last second, she'll be there to do it, because she's involved. And it's like, people sit on the couch, maybe they have a good idea for a book or whatever, like, oh, if I just had the chance. And it's like, no, you have to be in the here's a stupid analogy, but it's apt. You have to be in the middle of the stream to catch the fish, right? Like, you can't like be on the banks and say, oh, if I only, if the fish jumped into my lap, I'd eat. You have to be in the middle of it. And then stuff just kind of comes if you're doing a decent job. I hope.
Great advice. Yep. Got to get your reps in. Get your reps in.
Yeah. Because you love it, and because you don't know what's going to happen. It's like you're sending an email. You don't know if the person's going to respond, but you got to send the email. That's sort of what it is to be a writer.
Awesome.
I hope
Jake, thank you so much for joining the show. We really appreciate your time. Great to catch up with you again. And all the best with, again, Coop, the making of a Showtime Lakers Legend.
Yes.
You guys out everywhere, so make sure you pick up a copy. And
nice.
Jake, of course, please let us know if there's any projects you'd like our audience to know about, where they can find and follow you on social media. I know you said not Instagram, but that's okay. Please let us know where our audience can connect and anything you got coming up.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I don't use it all that much, but people can see, articles and book stuff if they'd like, at Jake Uitti, UITTI. And along with Coop, actually, the same day, unplanned, did a memoir with Tim Hardaway. It came out on the same day called Killer Crossover. And then next year in the spring, I have books with Robert Parrish and Jason Terry coming out. So, and I hope to be working on more stuff soon, and I hope to keep this going because I really love it. And thanks for having me on and let me talk about it.
Great to have you. Hope to do it again in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
All the best with all those projects coming up. So he was Jake Uitti. Check out his stuff. Thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Congrats on the pod.